I used to think life was finally aligning for me. I wasn't rich, but I had enough to live comfortably, and more importantly, I had Maria. She wasn't just my fiancée, she was the person who made my long workdays worth it. Every night, we'd talk about the house we'd buy, the kids we'd raise, and the life we'd build together. I worked as a project manager at a mid-sized firm, nothing glamorous, but I was moving up the ladder. For the first time, I felt like I had a clear path ahead. A steady climb, a steady love, and a steady future. If you enjoy the stories we share, subscribe, like this video, and comment where you are watching us from. My mother had other ideas. She'd never been shy about her opinions, especially when it came to the women in my life. A wife should be an investment, not a liability, she would say, as if marriage was some kind of corporate merger. At first, I thought her disapproval of Maria was just the usual protective skepticism. She'd say things like, "She's nice, but nice won't pay the bills." Or, "You need someone who can push you further." I ignored it because I assumed, naively, that love was mine to choose. Then came the day that split my life into before and after. I came home from work, expecting to see Maria waiting for me like she usually did. Instead, I found her sitting on the couch, hands folded tightly, eyes glassy like she'd been holding back tears. My mother was sitting across from her, smiling faintly, as if she'd just concluded some kind of negotiation. "I've been talking to Maria," my mother began, in that calm, almost patronizing tone she used when she thought she was saving me from myself. "She's decided it's best to marry your brother instead." I laughed at first. I thought it was some kind of sick joke. But Maria wouldn't meet my eyes. She just murmured, "Your brother, he's more established. He already has his own business. He can give me stability." The words hit me like bricks. My brother, Daniel, was younger by 3 years. He'd always been the golden boy, confident, charming, quick to succeed at everything. He had an electronics store downtown, and my mother worshipped that fact as if it made him some kind of royalty. I looked between the two of them, trying to find even a sliver of guilt in their faces. Maria's lips trembled. My mother looked smug. "Daniel is more promising," she continued. "He can take care of her in ways you just can't right now." I wanted to fight. I wanted to grab Maria's hand, tell her she was making a mistake, tell my mother she had no right to interfere. But somewhere in the pit of my stomach, a heavier truth sat like a stone. If Maria could be convinced to leave me this easily, she was never really mine to begin with. So I didn't yell. I didn't argue. I didn't even cry. I just nodded once, turned to Maria, and said, "Then I wish you both the best." I packed a single suitcase that night and booked a bus ticket to a city I'd only ever visited once before. I didn't say goodbye to anyone. Not my mother. Not Daniel. Not even Maria. The ride out of town felt like slipping out of my own life. I stared out the window as the skyline I'd grown up with disappeared, replaced by miles of highway and unknown towns. There's a strange kind of silence that comes after a betrayal. Not the noisy, fiery rage people imagine, but a dull, almost hollow quiet. I didn't feel like shouting. I just felt empty. In that emptiness, I made a decision. If my own family could dismiss me so easily, then I'd build something they couldn't ignore, something that didn't need their approval. I didn't know how yet, but I knew it would be mine. Completely mine. The city I chose wasn't glamorous. It wasn't the kind of place people moved to for opportunity. It was where they ended up because they couldn't afford anywhere else. My first apartment was a one-bedroom above a laundromat, where the air always smelled faintly of detergent and hot metal. The walls were so thin I could hear the neighbor's TV through the night, and my bed was just a mattress on the floor. But it was mine. Nobody could walk into this space and tell me I wasn't enough. At first, I didn't have a grand plan, just the certainty that I would never again be at someone else's mercy. I'd saved a little money, enough to survive a couple of months if I was careful. I picked up odd jobs, loading trucks, assembling furniture, anything that paid cash. Every night, I researched business ideas until my eyes burned. I wasn't just chasing money, I was chasing control. The turning point came one rainy afternoon in a diner. I overheard two small business owners complaining about how expensive and unreliable their suppliers were. Something clicked. I knew logistics from my old job. I understood vendor contracts, supply chains, delivery scheduling. That night, I mapped out a plan for a wholesale distribution service that would focus on undercutting big suppliers and offering faster turnaround times. I didn't have a warehouse. I didn't have a fleet. I barely had a desk. But I had an idea, and for the first time in months, I had hope. The first year was brutal. I worked 18-hour days, sometimes driving the delivery truck myself because I couldn't afford to hire drivers. I negotiated contracts over the phone while eating sandwiches in the cab, and I kept my invoices in a shoebox under my bed. There were weeks when I didn't know if I'd make rent, but somehow, every month, I scraped by. I thought about my mother more than I wanted to admit. Not because I missed her, because every moment of exhaustion was laced with the memory of her saying I couldn't provide. Those words didn't fade, they burned. And when I felt like collapsing, they were the match that kept the fire alive. Year 2 brought my first real break. A restaurant chain placed a bulk order after a supplier failed them at the last minute. I delivered it myself, on time, and the manager handed me a contract on the spot. That deal gave me enough cash to rent a small warehouse, hire 2 drivers, and print my company's name, Stonebridge Supply, on the side of a truck. The first time I saw that logo roll out of the lot, I felt something shift. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was building. By year 4, we were in 3 cities. I had 30 employees, a proper office, and contracts with national brands. My accountant called me one afternoon with a number that made my hands go numb. My company was now valued at $25 million. It should have been pure joy. Instead, my first thought was of home. I wondered if my mother knew. I wondered if Maria ever thought about what I'd become. I wondered if Daniel was still running that electronics store or if he'd expanded into something bigger. I got my answer sooner than I expected. One morning, I opened my email to find a message with a familiar last name. It was short, almost awkward. Hey, I need help. Can we talk? Daniel, I stared at the screen for a long time. Years of silence had passed between us, and now my little brother. The one who was more promising, the one who could take care of my fiancée, was asking me for help, and I intended to hear every word of his desperation. When I agreed to meet Daniel, I made sure it was on my terms. No friendly reunion at a coffee shop. No home visits. We met in the glass-walled conference room of my headquarters, a space deliberately designed to feel intimidating. Sleek steel chairs, polished floors, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. If he wanted help, he was going to see exactly what I had built without him. He walked in wearing a suit that didn't quite fit, carrying a leather briefcase that looked worn at the edges. His smile was the same as always, confident, bordering on cocky, but his eyes told the truth. They were tired, darting around the room like he was searching for a lifeline. Long time, he said, sliding into the chair across from me. Not long enough, I replied flatly. He chuckled like he thought I was joking, but the laugh died quickly. He laid out the story. The electronics store had done well for a few years, but bigger chains had eaten into his market share. A failed expansion into 2 more locations drained his savings. A bad loan, a few bad hires, and now he was drowning in debt. The business was weeks away from collapsing entirely. I just need some cash flow to get back on my feet, he said. You've got the resources. I'd pay you back, obviously. I leaned back in my chair, letting the silence stretch between us. I remembered the day my mother told me Maria was marrying him instead. I remembered the way he couldn't even meet my eyes back then. I'm not in the business of lending, I finally said. But I am in the business of acquisitions. He blinked. What do you mean? I'll buy the company, I said simply. Your debts, your assets, your contracts. Everything. You'll stay on as an employee at a fair salary. But it won't be yours anymore. The color drained from his face. That's not what It's the only offer you're getting, I cut in. For a moment, I saw the younger brother I used to protect, the one I defended in schoolyard fights, the one I taught to ride a bike. But that image dissolved when I remembered how easily he took what was mine. My sympathy turned to stone. He hesitated for another few seconds before nodding. Fine. The paperwork was drawn up within the week. The sale went through at a fraction of what his company might have been worth in its prime, but now it was mine, folded neatly into Stonebridge Supply's growing portfolio. Daniel kept his job title, but reported directly to one of my managers. I never once stepped into his new office. I wanted him to feel the distance. The first time I saw him in the break room, pouring himself a cup of coffee, he looked smaller somehow, not physically, but in presence. Our eyes met briefly, and for the first time in his life, he looked away first. That night, I poured myself a drink and stood at my office window, watching the city lights flicker. Revenge wasn't as loud as I thought it would be. It wasn't a triumphant shout. It was a quiet, steady hum of satisfaction. I had taken everything they said I couldn't have and built it into something they had to work for. But life has a way of circling back to unfinished business. It wasn't long before another email landed in my inbox, this time from my cousin, saying my father was ill. And just like that, I knew I would have to walk back into the city I'd sworn to leave behind. The city felt smaller when I returned, as if the years had shrunken it. The streets I used to know were still lined with the same old storefronts, though some had new signs, and others were shuttered entirely. My driver slowed in front of my parents' house, and for a moment, I considered telling him to keep going. But the thought of my father lying in a hospital bed pulled me out of my hesitation. I hadn't seen him since I left. My father had never been an expressive man. His love was quiet, buried under long work hours and an unshakable sense of duty. He wasn't blameless in what happened, but he'd never been the instigator. I found him in a stark hospital room, thinner than I remembered, his skin pale against the white sheets. His eyes lit up when he saw me. "You came," he said, his voice weak but warm. "I came," I replied, pulling up a chair. We spoke in fragments, about his treatments, the doctors, and the food he couldn't bring himself to eat. Then, after a long pause, he looked at me and said, "I'm sorry for not stepping in back then." It was the closest thing to an apology I would ever get from him. I just nodded. "Rest, Dad. We'll talk later." That evening, my mother insisted I come to dinner. I debated refusing, but curiosity got the better of me. The table was set like nothing had ever happened. Roast chicken, mashed potatoes, a bottle of wine breathing in the center. Daniel sat at the far end, avoiding my eyes as if looking at me might scorch him. The conversation was polite, almost painfully so. My mother asked about my business in the same tone someone might ask about the weather. I answered briefly, not offering more than I had to. I could feel her studying me, measuring the cut of my suit, the watch on my wrist, the way I carried myself. After dessert, she asked me to step outside with her. We stood in the cool night air, the hum of the street lamps filling the silence. "I want to say I'm sorry," she began. "I was thinking about your future and I made a mistake." I said nothing, letting her words hang between us. She shifted, clearly uncomfortable. "I know you've done well for yourself, and I was hoping maybe you could help us now. With your father's medical bills, the house repairs." Her voice softened into the same coaxing tone she'd used on Maria years ago, the one that wrapped selfishness in the guise of care. I finally met her eyes. "I forgive you," I said evenly. Her expression flickered with relief until I added, "But forgiveness doesn't mean you get another chance to take from me." The relief drained from her face. For the first time, I saw something unfamiliar in her, uncertainty. She opened her mouth to speak, but I'd already turned and walked back inside. Daniel avoided me for the rest of the night. My father, when I stopped by his room later, thanked me quietly for covering part of his hospital bills. I told him to keep that between us. My help was for him, not for her. I left the house that night feeling lighter, though not because I'd mended anything. I hadn't come back for reconciliation. I'd come back to prove, to myself most of all, that I could face them without bending. The next morning, my phone rang before sunrise. I didn't have to check the caller ID to know it was her. My mother always had a way of striking when she thought people were most vulnerable, when sleep still clung to them, when their defenses were thin. I almost let it go to voicemail, but some part of me wanted to hear what she'd say when last night's conversation had settled in. "I've been thinking," she began without greeting. "We've both said things we regret, and maybe we can start fresh." Her voice was honeyed, deliberate. I could picture her pacing in the kitchen, her hands wrapped around a coffee mug, already rehearsing every word before she spoke it. "I'm not looking to start fresh," I replied. "You don't have to be so cold," she said sharply, her warmth vanishing for just a second. I know you think I was wrong, but everything I did back then was for your good. You were drifting. Daniel was stable. He could give Maria. Stop. I cut in, my voice low but steady. You don't get to rewrite history. You didn't do it for me. You did it because you thought you knew better, because you didn't think I'd become anything worth respecting. You were wrong. There was silence, then a faint sigh. Well, I can admit I made a mistake. But we can't change the past. What matters now is family. Your father needs. I've already taken care of Dad, I said. Quietly. Without you. That landed. I could hear it in the way she exhaled, slow and heavy. So, you'll help him but not me? She asked finally. Yes, I said. Because he never tried to humiliate me or take my life apart for his own sense of pride. You did. And you'll have to live with that. Her tone turned brittle. You think you're punishing me by keeping your money to yourself? Fine. But don't pretend you're better than the rest of us. You're just holding a grudge. Maybe, I admitted. But this grudge built a business worth $25 million. And it's the reason I'll never have to sit where Daniel is sitting right now, working for someone who remembers exactly what you took from him. The line went quiet. She didn't hang up, just lingered there, maybe hoping I'd soften, maybe realizing I never would. Finally, I ended the call myself. The rest of the day, I kept to my father's hospital room, reading the paper to him while he drifted in and out of sleep. I told him about the company's newest contracts, about the cities we were expanding into. He smiled faintly at the news, even if I wasn't sure how much he was really taking in. By the time evening fell, I felt a clarity I hadn't in years. I hadn't yelled. I hadn't begged for understanding. I'd simply set a line, and I wasn't moving it. She could hate me, resent me, even twist the story in her head until she was the victim. It didn't matter. I'd built a life that didn't require her approval or her forgiveness. I stayed in the city just long enough to make sure my father's care was secure. Every bill was covered, every treatment approved. I set it up so the hospital would never have to call my mother for a single financial decision. She wouldn't even know my name was on the account. That was my way of drawing a final line. I could care for the man who raised me without ever giving her a single inch of control. On my last day, I stopped by one of my company's branches. The one that used to be Daniel's electronics store. The sign out front now reads Stonebridge Supply in bold letters. Inside, the shelves were stocked with commercial hardware and wholesale goods, not flat-screen TVs or phone accessories. It was unrecognizable. Daniel was at the counter, reviewing invoices with one of my managers. He looked up when he saw me, and for a moment, I thought he might say something. But he just gave a brief nod, the kind of acknowledgement you give a boss you're obligated to respect. There was no malice in it, just quiet acceptance. In that instant, I realized he'd learned the same lesson I had, though in a different way. The world doesn't hand you security, and the people you think will always side with you can just as easily turn away. I didn't linger. I stepped back into the sunlight, got in my car, and told the driver to head for the airport. As we passed through the familiar streets one last time, I noticed the faces of people I used to know, some older, some exactly the same. A few recognized me, their eyes widening, their whispers trailing behind me. The gossip would make its way to my mother soon enough. The son she dismissed had returned, successful, and left without giving her a single thing she wanted. On the plane, I stared out the window as the city shrank beneath us. There was no triumphal music, no cinematic swelling of victory, just a calm certainty in my chest. I had chosen my peace over their approval, my boundaries over their comfort. I had come back not to reconcile, but to confirm something I'd always known. I didn't need them to survive, and I sure as hell didn't need them to thrive. They could call it bitterness. They could call it pride. I called it self-preservation. If your family once chose someone else's future over yours, would you open the door for them years later, or would you hold your boundaries like I did? Share your story in the comments, because some betrayals aren't meant to be forgotten. And if this story resonated with you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more stories that dive into the messy truth of family and boundaries. See you soon in the next story.